Okay, so arriving by boat in St. Petersburg is not the most scenic way to start your trip in Russia. And given the media coverage leading up to the Olympics in Sochi, our expectations were not that high. This is what we had expected to find in Moscow. We expected dilapidated buildings, depressed-looking people, and neo-Nazi gangs running around the streets. And while I can only speak as a tourist, what we found was actually really nice. Our first stop was St. Petersburg. This is its iconic Church of the Spilled Blood. This incredibly elaborate Orthodox church is decorated head to toe in mosaics. None of this is painted. None of Russia's churches are houses of worship anymore. This one spent 40 years under communism as a government storage shed. The church is located right off Nevsky Prospect, the city's main boulevard. And one of the first things we did was take a stroll down it to get acquainted with the city. Here is the Kazan Cathedral. Modeled after St. Peter's in Rome, it was used as a museum of atheism by the Soviets. So we are just sitting in a park off of Nevsky Prospect in St. Petersburg under a statue of Catherine the Great, taking a little sightseeing break. Not sure if you can see her face, it looks a little too bright. Just watching the pigeons and the flowers. Doing some nice sightseeing. And we are going to head across the street for a quick coffee break. What had once been depressingly named Grocery Store Number 1 had been converted into this sumptuous-looking cafe serving $10 lattes and $20 cheese plates. At the end of Nevsky Prospect, right against the Neva River, is the former Winter Palace of the Tsar of Russia. It's now known as the Hermitage Museum, and while it's considered one of the best museums in the world, we were awestruck before we even entered the door. Given that this building is both an art museum and a former royal palace, it's like two sites in one. There are lots of famous European artists, like Van Gogh and Gauguin here, as well as a collection of portraits from Russia's past, including this Russian Napoleon, General Camel Toe, that large female knight from Game of Thrones, and who could forget General Uncle Leo. For as great as the Hermitage was, there was another museum in St. Petersburg that we actually found to be even more interesting.
We are at the Russian Museum, a fine collection of Russian art, not found at the Hermitage.
The Russian Museum included works from artists unknown outside of Russia. There were scenes depicting the struggle of peasants, battles from the past, social realism from the 20th century, scenes from far-reaching corners of the country, general peasant life, and this. We are out on a point on the Neva River. Isn't that right, Nikki?
Yes.
It's called Stelka. Behind us is the bridge we just walked over, as well as, that's the bridge. That big golden dome is St. Isaac's Cathedral. The pointy gold thing is the Admiralty Building. And then moving along, we have the Hermitage, right on the banks of the Neva. Just off the Neva River, there are numerous canals that flow through the city's center. So, Nikki,
we are heading back to our hotel after a fun-filled day of walking around, seeing lots of churches and stuff.
What's the name of our hotel?
The Pushka Inn.
And we have a room on the river. The hotel is actually right there. About an hour outside the city is Peter the Great's lavish palace called Peterhof, sometimes referred to as Russia's Versailles. It's most famous for its cascading gardens which flow down into the Gulf of Finland. The enormous royal grounds featured one extremely large palace, several smaller palaces, including one that Catherine the Great lived in, some exquisite fountains, very well manicured gardens, gold on everything, and one well-placed trick fountain. Getting to and from Peterhof required a ride in St. Petersburg's very deep metro system. And here is what your average platform looks like at a subway station in Russia. In addition to being clean and exquisitely decorated, the trains ran at rush hour frequency all day long.
It's 6:45 a.m., almost 6:45 a.m., and we are about to take a high-speed train from St. Petersburg to Moscow.
This is the Kremlin in Moscow, the scourge of the Western world for over 50 years. And this is Red Square, a place they still parade ballistic missiles through. Although the day we were there, it was a far less menacing sight, with a flash mob of ballroom dancers. Similar to what we found in St. Petersburg, everything in Moscow, especially the streets, were huge. This is one of the main boulevards. All the crosswalks of the main streets are underground, which limits traffic lights and lets drivers go as seemingly as fast as they want. Sightseeing in Moscow is defined by two main sites, both of which were conveniently viewable from our hotel room. Dead ahead is Red Square. St. Basil's is in the distance. To the right, the walled-in portion, is the Kremlin. In addition to being the seat of Russia's government, the Kremlin also houses numerous museums and historic churches.
It is a slightly rainy day here in Moscow, but we're spending the day touring the Kremlin, and I'm going to give you a little spin tour. So here we have the Church of the Archangel. Over here we have the Church of the Annunciation. Over here we have the Church of the Assumption. All of these bells, this is a bell tower. Ivan's bell tower. And last but not least, we have someone's cannon. The Tsar's cannon.
The Tsar's cannon, yes.
Tsarist cannon.
And that is a spin tour of the Kremlin. The Kremlin was actually quite beautiful. A giant red wall surrounds the entire complex, and there are 20 large red guard towers. The most surprising part of the Kremlin? The rather lax security. This is a guard twirling a whistle. I mean, really? Come on, comrade, where's your AK? On the other side of the Kremlin's wall is the enormous Red Square. That is Lenin's tomb. At the end of the square is probably Russia's most iconic site, St. Basil's Cathedral. It was built in the 16th century by the Tsar known as Ivan the Terrible. And while the inside of the church is still richly decorated, the blooming lilac trees outside were a popular spot for wedding photos. On the other end of Red Square, opposite the Kremlin walls, is the enormous department store called Gum. Once famous for desolate hallways and empty shelves, it now houses one of the most ornate malls you will ever see. Nikki even found a cute pop-up art store on the 3rd floor. When we left for our trip, we weren't sure what to expect from Russia. What we found were cities that were clean, cosmopolitan, and modern. Both St. Petersburg, but especially Moscow, seemed far removed from the ghosts of their Soviet past. And while I must say that as a tourist we were both impressed, it's worth mentioning that several people we talked to expressed their desire to get the hell out of Russia.